Hello. Getting started a little bit later. It is what it is. But guess what? I remembered to do announcements on the Discord, on Instagram, and TikTok. Am I posting regularly in all these spaces? No. Do I care? Not particularly, except for the Discord. I'm working on that. It's another day, another stream in fascist America. Welcome to whatever this is. An attempt at providing education, advocacy, and a little common sense in this digital wasteland. I'm Aubri Devashrayee. Today, we're going to continue talking about some global news, national news, things that we didn't get to yesterday. But more importantly, we're going to be talking about Banned Book Club, and I have a lot that I want to show and discuss. It will come as no surprise that with everything going on and with like the amount of symbolism that Toni Morrison packs into all of her writing, I decided to not go over this whole section that I originally said we were reading. I know, surprise. It's not as if this is a pattern. But there is so much to go through with even just like these few pages that I have planned to discuss for today. So I'm very excited to talk about that. Also, how I'm presenting today, namaste, it very much has to do with the reading, not trying to center myself or anything, but just highlighting how Toni Morrison's writing is so important and how much wisdom really is there, that even if you don't come from particular experiences, especially when it comes to beauty standards that Black women specifically in America experience, that there are these imposed beauty standards that hurt everyone. It is meant to hurt some people more than others, particularly with colorism and talking about hair texture and everything that falls into whatever that means that is imposed by white supremacy. So, and based off of this very deep anti-Blackness that exists to justify racial oppression. So we'll talk about that. And then we will finish chapter 30 of The Scarlet Pimpernel. I'm so ready to be done with this book. I don't even know why I included it as an option sometimes. It's so fucking annoying. But I think it has been useful as an exercise discussing where there is so much propaganda. And it will be very nice to have a change of pace in reading the Communist Manifesto after this. So, shall we get into what I've planned for today? So, continuing with this fake podcast that The Onion has created called A Very Fatal Murder, that they have released all at once, which we're blessed with, to be clear, but I've been shocked that they've actually included all of them, like had them published all on the same day. And I'm like, you aren't going to like spread this out over time? Okay, that's fine. I'm not complaining, but I still want to continue with this. Yesterday we listened to the third episode of this. We had listened to it on a previous stream that I had watched out of order because I thought they had just released that one. But I was wrong. They have this whole series. So let's see what this one has in store for us. It is called The Official Story for episode 4. So here we go.
The night of May 9th, Haley Price was waiting to meet up with her boyfriend, Brian. so they could make out and talk about what a bitch Alex was being lately. They're going to meet at their usual spot, the field outside the bottle cap factory. Bluff Springs is dark at night. There's only one streetlight, and it's the moon.
You can see the stars, which is romantic as fuck.
The two of them like to meet in the field and hook up in Brian's mom's old...
You can see the stars, which is romantic as fuck. Also, this, like, attempt at trying to be profound, but it just coming, like, the bathos of it all, of being like, there was one street lamp, and it was the moon. Just, like, how it is said is just, like, so lame, but I love that.
They liked it because the seats reclined all the way, and they thought it was cool that it still had a tape deck. That's pure romance when you're young and in love and don't live steps from the finest cultural institutions the country has to offer.
Haley loved that car. I did too. I mean, we've both grown up in that car, you know?
But Brian texted Haley to tell her he would be late. He was preparing an elaborate balloon sculpture depicting the two of them on a speedboat to pose under. Haley told him not to come. It was getting late anyway, and she was cold. She wanted to go home.
I was really hungry anyway, so I made this thing I called michos, and it's basically like nachos, but instead of chips, you use ground beef.
But Haley never did go home. Just a few minutes after sending that text, Haley was shot, stabbed, drowned, strangled, and given a haircut. By 1:30 a.m., the life had drained from her supple body. At least, that's what the police say.
That's what they keep saying. Like, they keep adding more things that were done to her, which honestly, that's not uncommon, but
I can't see the
wow.
moon anymore.
Horrible. Just horrible.
That little detail.
If I were you.
Oh yeah, he fucking did it.
What do you
Uh-oh.
mean Haley's dead?
Oh my god, you didn't know? From The Onion and Onion Public Radio, I'm David Pascal, and this is A Very Fatal Murder. It had been 2 months since Haley's body was found, and the Bluff Springs Police Department still had no major leads. And after hearing about how they had mishandled Brian's cases in the past, and how they never considered bringing a podcast around to the force to investigate the murder, I knew that I had to question every detail the police presented me with. At this point, I was still the only podcaster on the case, and it was up to me to bring Haley's killer to justice. The police say that all it took to kill Haley was a gun, a knife, a rope, and a pool of water. But that always seems strange to me. I mean, can a person really be killed from just a gunshot, 7 stab wounds, and lack of oxygen? I needed to find out for myself.
It's weird, right? I mean, someone doesn't just die because you shot them.
David, have you considered
Strange
doing your own
situation.
forensic testing?
Yeah. Bring in some experts.
The police's official account goes like this. Haley Price began walking home sometime around 1:15 a.m. on May 10th, when she was bludgeoned over the head and dragged into the bottle cap factory. There, she was shot, stabbed, drowned, strangled, put in an ugly shirt, given a mop-top haircut and a manicure, slashed across the stomach, and placed gently on a pillow. By 1:25, she was dead. I needed help to
The
recreate
ugly
the
shirt
situation,
and mop-top
so Ethel
haircut
dispatched a group
is
of
so
young,
extra.
desperate OPR interns to Nebraska. We needed to replicate the official facts perfectly to find out if what the police were alleging was actually
OPR,
true. I got funding from OPR.
meaning The Onion.
To build
They're
an
making fun of
exact copy
NPR,
the bottle
to be
cap
clear.
factory about a mile outside
Which
of
they
town.
deserve.
And I got it up and running in about 5 months with the help of our team of interns. Eventually, our factory replaced Callaway Industries
probably
as the
were
biggest
not
bottle
paid.
cap producer in mid-Nebraska, and we were employing 2,000 people. We just needed to put the final touches on the testing site. It was 54 degrees and cloudy on the night that Haley was killed, so on the day of the test, we filled the area with massive refrigeration units and rented a blimp to hover in front of the moon. Conditions were finally perfect. At exactly 1:15 a.m., we started.
Nice. Okay, Janice, how do you feel? Huh. Okay. So I guess it would have been possible under the right circumstances.
Oh my god, they shot one of the interns. This is so crazy. But this is what they do with these podcasts too, where they're like, okay, so we're going to replicate this situation, see if it's possible. It's not even that far from the truth in many circumstances. Also, like, how they have so much fucking money to do all this extra stuff while they're in this town that is, sounds like they're all under the thumb of this, like, corporate oligarch. So, wow. Just flaunting their money.
Our first test proved that it actually is possible to kill someone this way.
But
But it brought up a huge inconsistency in the police's story. See, in just a matter of hours, the intern I had asked to run the test was arrested and charged with murder. And just a few months later, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. So why is Calloway still walking free? This episode of A Very Fatal Murder is brought to you by OPR bottle caps. OPR bottle caps are high quality and produced in a factory in rural Nebraska. They're perfect for any bottle and come in 3 great colors. Even better, when you support OPR bottle caps, you support small town America. Order online at oprbottlecaps.com today.
They're actively profiting
So,
from the guy's
the angle of
company.
impact
The killer's company.
and the amount of blood present here, we know
He's
that
a
the victim would have
sponsor.
been about here when they were stabbed and shot.
So, the same place.
Yes, you see, because the angle of impact for all of these is just
I asked
under
Gina
1
Lewis, a
degrees.
blood spatter
We know
expert
that
from the
the
NYPD,
right
to take a look at the blood stain from Haley's murder. I was hoping that she could give me a better understanding of what actually happened because she's from New York too.
Now, what does that angle tell us about the income of the person who did this?
That's not something blood spatter helps us determine.
I also brought in a haircut expert, Joey Sharp, to help me figure out how long it might have taken to cut Haley's mop top and who might have done it.
Wow, okay. See, whoever did this was smart. You got a mastermind on your hands.
That's what I thought.
I mean, I would never have thought to do this shape for her. But you know what? It actually works with her bone structure. This is insane.
How long would a cut like
Damn.
this have taken? And keep in mind that we're in small town America and things just go a little slower around here.
It's hard to say. I mean, a savant like this could get it done in maybe 20 or 30 minutes, but who knows what this guy is capable of.
There was one detail about the case that the police had completely failed to address.
Just like
How
all
could
of
the
these
world be
absurd
so cruel?
extra
Does
experts.
evil live within us all? And how could such joy and such profound sorrow exist in the same universe?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer, but the Bible does provide some guidance. In the
That's the
original
voice of
creation
Father Anthony
we do
Scarmone,
see
a
the
priest at
act of
All
evil
Saints
being
Catholic
punished
Church on
by the Lord.
9th.
If we look to Proverbs 11:17, for example, we see, "A man who is kind benefits himself, but a cruel man hurts himself." So while there will always be cruelty in the world,
I just feel so hopeless, you know? I mean, she was so young and beautiful. How could God let this happen?
But what about Haley's nails, the polish that had been painted just 15 minutes before police arrived? After scouring the internet and feeding Ethel thousands of pages of 17 magazine,
Well, hello, Raiders. Welcome, welcome. Zeoduke. I think I asked how you say that. And I can't remember. I'm sorry. Welcome again. Yes, we're Zeoduke. Okay. Oh, thank God. I was worried, but glad we got that. We got that settled. Hello, Turd Bomb. Welcome. I mean, I don't want to go into it too confident, though, if it's not right. We are currently watching another one of these episodes of a fake podcast by The Onion, where, especially for people who listen to these true crime ones, which I have done, listened to many of these, they actually had they just have all these little jokes that are really funny, overt ones that you get, but for instance, they just did an ad reading for a corporation of oh, get these bottle caps, and it's the killer's company. So they're part of the problem, which I like. And it often, is the truth. Just deeply exploitative in nature a lot of the time. How all are you doing? What were you talking about? What were you going over on Zach's stream? What weren't you going over? Honestly, that might be a better question.
we discovered what color Haley was wearing.
Midnight Plum by Wet and Wild. Interesting. Downloading Wet and Wild consumer data.
We tried to find a connection between the Calloway family and the Wet n Wild Corporation, but there was none. In fact, Calloway had vehemently opposed the brand when it first hit shelves because he worried that it would drive his own beauty brand, Wet by W.O. Calloway, out of business.
It's pretty rare that we see this few prints. The criminal definitely took precautions.
You mean like wrapping their hands in $100 bills?
Gloves is more likely.
I talked to Paula McNamara, a forensic analyst for the state.
Wrapping them in $100 bills is
She
crazy.
told me that the area was remarkably free of prints, which made me recall an important detail that a local woman had yelled at me when I was doing some background research about Calloway.
He ain't got no fingerprints. There's smooth and shiny, just like the rest of them.
Love the format of fake media as a great lens onto the real one. Yes. Radio stations and games. Yeah, exactly. It really is doing a great job of doing commentary on the form itself. And I'm like, this is why we need good satire. Good satire is important.
What if Calloway
especially
didn't
these
have any
days?
fingerprints? If that was true, then wasn't every surface
Do you feel like there's a
without
video
print
game, like
covered
you
in
mentioned in
Calloway's
games,
fingerprints?
like where
And
they do that
if
really
was the
well,
case,
like
the crime
radio
scene had Calloway's
stations?
prints all over it. After doing all that research, I still didn't have conclusive evidence implicating W.O. Calloway. I was no better than the police, and that was unacceptable. The only thing I had learned after months of work was that Haley was a vibrant girl in the prime of her life when she died. But with no real answers and
If you're no better than the police, yeah, that is unacceptable, actually. I'm kind of thinking of GTA. Oh, interesting. Even since the first one, they were doing that well. Okay. To be honest, I've never played GTA. This will not be that surprising, I'm sure, if you've watched what I do before. Look into BioShock. The narrative is amazing. Ooh, I've heard that one is good. I know a lot of people really enjoy that too. That like the story is good and there's some like good commentary, like larger social commentary, which I always love. Try and hold up a mirror. Yeah, love that.
a court order to stay at least 100 feet away from Haley Price's corpse, I was getting frustrated.
And being entertained at the same time. It's a good
Can you
deal.
say your name for us?
Rachel Lawson.
And your position?
I'm a professor of screenwriting here at UCLA.
Great. Okay, so basically, I'm on episode 4 of this true crime podcast, and I've got some really dynamite stuff, but I'm worried I'm kind of starting to lose the thread. Do you have any advice for what might get things back on track?
I assume you've talked to the victim's family.
Oh yeah, got them crying and everything.
And established a prime suspect, someone with a dark past?
Yeah, town millionaire, he's perfect.
That's great. Well, it sounds like you're doing everything right. I guess the only thing I could add is it always helps to end the episode with some sort of bombshell. Something to shake things up and...
Whoa.
A bombshell. Okay.
Oh, we're getting there.
I like that.
What's it gonna be?
And my next question is...
That was 10 years ago. Next time on A Very Fatal Murder.
Oof, how about that Icelandic volcano? I don't know about
So
this
dumb.
God, I hope they rescue those Chilean miners.
Okay, this is it. Calloway is on the other side of this door. A Very Fatal Murder is made possible by the entire cast of The Real World Seattle and the National Foundation for Sound
The
and
Real
Arts.
World!
And a special thanks to the Big Book of 1,000 Facts for fact-checking this episode. Visit our website for more information and a chance to
A
join
book
the
that's
next
already
class
written.
if you're
That's what they
interested.
use for fact
Okay,
checking.
guys, it is pledge season at OPR,
To do fact checking for a murder case that hadn't happened.
and we're doing something
Wow.
special this week, so listen up. We're giving away one brand new murder weapon every hour to one Very Fatal Murder listener who donates to OPR. It can be any amount, whatever you can afford. Even $5 really helps us reach our goal. And one more thing. This week, all our donations are being matched by my parents. Just go to opr.org to donate.
Oh.
Haven't you always wanted to hold a podcast episode in your hands? Now you can. Subscribe to The Onion to receive 12 monthly issues of the newspaper. Head to membership.theonion.com to learn more.
Wow. I like how the auto-generated captions said union instead of onion, which I mean, that would be great if like maybe the Onion should do that. They need to unionize with like satirical magazines, newspapers. There is probably like some very helpful things they could pursue to protect free speech, actually. Okay. There we go. That's episode 4. Let's see what some of these comments are. That was 10 years ago. Hit me like a ton of bricks. Whoever thought murder could be so fatal? I know. Earlier in this episode, they so what happens in a lot of these true crime podcasts is that they're like, oh, we tried this out to see if it's possible. We like built this thing, and instead they just like shot one of their interns, and they were like, we're going to see if this is fatal. The intern died, and they're like, it is. It's wild, but also like not that far from reality. Didn't they get a truckload of money from the InfoWars case too? Yeah, honestly. If they'd used that for like a strike fund for satire, which yesterday there was a chatter, Photo Piadini, who said that there is an Italian like faux newspaper like The Onion that many conservative people there think is real, and they like genuinely, like, conservative people share some of their stuff thinking it's real. That I'm like, what are these other publications, fake publications that are actually doing like much better reporting than actual reporters a lot of the time? So much resources to do cool new satire, holding to account. Exactly. We watched this a little bit ago on the stream, but where is this? Was Tim Heidecker. He did this. InfoWars chief issues emergency statement. And I was like, he needs to use some of that settlement money for like getting nodes on his vocal cords taken care of after this episode. That sounded like it hurt with his impression of Alex Jones. Okay, shall we get to the news? I guess let's get to the news. That video is insane. Yeah, it is wild. Also, he's like not able to like not break. Like he breaks throughout it, and I love seeing that too. Where also like in that video, since I'm like not a frequent watcher of InfoWars and all of this like right-wing slop, I'm like, what is it with like the like Gen X boomer coded right-wing people where it looks like they have like Microsoft 97 screensavers going on in the background that are just like so overstimulating but also underwhelming at the same time? I don't know, man. No more funnies. I know. Amy Goodman, this young woman here. I love you, Amy Goodman, but sometimes you make me angry. I associate seeing you with like some stress because of the news that you have to share, which means you're doing your job in this unfortunate landscape. We aren't just being value-tained. Okay. Maybe let's speed through it a bit. I think I need that. What we had to do yesterday. I was like, I have to play a word game after this. I'm over.
To Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump Tuesday
Yes, you are.
blasted U.S. media outlets saying on Truth Social, if Iran surrenders, they would portray it as a, quote, masterful and brilliant victory over the United States, unquote. It comes as Iranian officials signal that negotiations to reach a ceasefire deal are ongoing. Tehran's top negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Iran's parliament, returned from Qatar on Tuesday. According to Iranian officials, his visit to Qatar aimed to secure the release of $24 billion, a quarter of Iranian funds frozen abroad. This comes as Iranian authorities partially restored internet access after a nationwide blackout that lasted for nearly 3 months. Israel said Wednesday it had killed Mohammed Odeh, Hamas's
that was a
newly appointed
long
armed
time.
wing chief in an operation in Gaza on Tuesday. A final statement said he was killed along with his wife and son. Gaza health officials said 6 people, including at least 1 woman, were killed and more than 20 others wounded in the same Israeli strike, which destroyed an upper floor of an apartment building in Gaza City. Since last October's so-called U.S.-brokered ceasefire, Israel's killed some 900 Palestinians in Gaza. This is a resident of
Yeah,
Gaza City
so-called
describing Israel's
indeed.
airstrike Tuesday.
There was a sudden airstrike by Israeli warplanes. It was a surprise. They hit a rooftop apartment in a building with 3 missiles, and they weren't simple missiles. They were heavy ones. There is no ceasefire. Day and night there's shelling.
Yeah,
The shelling
clearly.
is constant here. They say there's a ceasefire, but there is no ceasefire for us. This is the Eid atmosphere, as you can see. It is Eid now.
Yeah.
Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon killed at least 31 people and wounded 40 on Tuesday, according to Lebanon's health ministry. Israel launched more than 120 airstrikes Tuesday alone, one of the heaviest days of bombing in weeks. An Israeli military official confirmed troops had begun operating beyond the so-called Yellow Line, which is a boundary running roughly 10 kilometers inside Lebanon. The escalation comes despite a U.S. brokered ceasefire in place since mid-April. Since March 2nd, over 1 million Lebanese have been
YouTube
forced
almost
to flee their
always in
home, and more than
1.5.
3,100
Yeah.
have been killed.
I'm always in like
Israeli attacks. This is a resident
1.25 to 1.5.
Kids, women, and elderly people all sitting here. Suddenly, the Israelis send evacuation warnings, and these people get thrown into chaos. They pick themselves up and leave. Half an hour, 45 minutes later, look what happens.
The U.S. military
Yeah.
carried out
Trying to pretend that like, oh, sending an evacuation warning, like we do that. That's a good thing. And then it's like, okay, you don't give people nearly enough time. And also how like Satan Yahoo does these like disgusting like pre-recorded announcements where he's like, we care about your safety, please evacuate. It's like, why are you doing this in English? Why are you doing this in English? Because you know who this is for. It is not for the people you are claiming to care about that you're going to bomb imminently.
another strike Tuesday on a vessel in the eastern Pacific Ocean, killing one person, leaving two survivors. The Trump administration once again claimed the vessel was carrying drugs without providing any evidence. Video shared by the U.S. since September, the Pentagon says it has killed nearly 200 people in strikes on boats in the Caribbean and Pacific. The attacks have been widely condemned as illegal.
Yeah,
Hundreds
that's
of
just
immigrants
evil.
detained at the ICE jail known as Delaney Hall in Newark, New
Speaking
Jersey,
of
are
evil.
continuing their hunger and labor strike to protest inhumane conditions and call for their release. Delaney Hall is operated by the private prison company Geo Group. Outside the 1,000-bed jail, ICE agents clashed with protesters, pepper spraying them. 3 people have been arrested during the days-long standoff, even as Homeland Security denies there's an ongoing hunger strike. So-called border czar Tom Homan vowed to force-feed the immigrants on hunger strike if the situation at Delaney Hall, quote, gets bad enough, unquote. Newark is
Look
a
at those
sanctuary.
pigs. Look. Oh, we're so tough. We're so tough covering our faces and having sunglasses on. We're so scared of people who are here actually advocating for human rights. Like, I said this yesterday, but like, in an organizing group that I've been a part of, like, it can be getting anything done that's actually meaningful is so hard. It's hard to do. And with like so many different kinds of people and like viewpoints that like so many people want to act like cops where they're like, oh, I don't like this way that you're resisting. Meanwhile, they're like boomers who are retired and have capital and proximity to whiteness and privilege and free time and are straight and cis, where it's like, you really, and they're like, I might call the cops if someone starts vandalizing something. Then I'm like, you do realize if you call law enforcement, which no one, if you're going to a protest, I don't really think there are many situations that actually warrant the existence of, let's be honest, but like the need for law enforcement to show up, no matter where you are in the world, ACAB and whatnot, but especially in the US, that it's like, if you do that, you have so much fucking privilege that you are not part of a population where you will get shot or brutalized on sight without any questions asked. And like, for some reason, people just like can't get that around their heads. I'm like, oh, so you'd rather like risk someone's life because they're like doing a makeover on like capital, like on property that isn't hurting anyone, but like you'd rather have like that on your hands. Like that kind of shit frustrates me to no end. But like dealing with some people, especially like former law enforcement, that's why I'm always like ACAB, of like their most sensitive babies ever, where they don't care to listen to other people's opinions because they're used to being in charge and centered in every single situation, where they're like, oh, someone like was gonna talk about like spray painting something. That's like, oh, that's the worst thing you could comprehend to happen in this situation. Like, ugh, it's exhausting. I don't know if you all are like involved in various like organizing groups, how that all works out for you, like how anything gets done. I know this is not like an isolated thing to what I'm experiencing, like infighting and like having to find groups that you align more on your ideologies. Like that is really important, but also like it's a very long process in actually getting to that point a lot of the time.
DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullen has threatened to halt international flights and stop processing travelers to Newark International Airport and other major U.S. airports in sanctuary cities. We'll have more on this story after headlines. The Trump administration is expediting the use of mass immigration hearings in order to issue more deportation orders. NPR reports immigrants are now being scheduled to appear in front of what's known as master calendar hearings with an unprecedented 100 or more people at a time. For many immigrants, this is the first time they would appear in immigration court to plead their case. Immigrants without legal representation have been disproportionately targeted for these new hearings. Lawyers told NPR the practice is
Wow, you're
already
so
underway
brave.
in cities like Chicago and Boston. The Supreme Court has sided with the
poor
Trump
people.
administration in blocking a free speech lawsuit involving federal immigration judges. The conservative majority justices overturned a lower court ruling that had allowed the challenge to proceed. In 2020, a group of immigration judges filed a lawsuit over a federal government rule that limits their ability to speak out on public policy. The National Association of Immigration Judges said in a statement, quote, "Justice cannot endure when judges are intimidated into silence, nor can a nation remain free when the rule of law is subordinate to the whims of political ambition," unquote.
Hello. And it's times like this where like there are people that understand like, oh, I don't agree with what's happening, but also are completely ignorant or like unwilling to recognize how we got to this point. Like you do realize you trying to be cops, like some people actually being cops, but like policing people's behavior and how they're resisting this, like that comes from such a place of privilege. And also like you are perpetuating these same systems that like you claim to be against, which I have more on that later, but let's continue.
Mass protests have continued in Bolivia for nearly a month as thousands take to the streets demanding the resignation of President Rodrigo Paz. Lawmakers this week moved to approve the possible deployment of armed forces to suppress the mobilizations. Farmers, teachers, and others have joined the protests, calling on Paz's government to roll back austerity measures amid soaring living costs.
We want the government to solve this problem, to fix it once and for all, and to do so wholeheartedly. The babies are starving. We can't afford to buy food. We seniors no longer have the money to buy food, and I have my granddaughters who are orphans. I'm asking for a solution.
The Trump administration is reportedly preparing to deploy public health officials to Kenya in an effort to quickly staff a potential quarantine.
The working class have had it. The working class, like, we can't continue in these circumstances. So, like, why is anyone surprised that there are more and more people getting radicalized, or why people are pushed to radicalization and radical methods and becoming revolutionaries when, like, this is the system that we're in? That, like, many people have already been experiencing these conditions for a very long time and understand that the more marginalized you are in intersections of marginalization that people experience, but yeah,
Center to send U.S. citizens who've been exposed
it's not
to
for
Ebola.
no
That's
reason.
according to the Wall Street Journal, which said some members of the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps have received deployment notices to Kenya. The World Health Organization says there have been more than 900 suspected Ebola cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo, over 200 suspected deaths in just under 2 weeks since the outbreak was first announced. This comes as healthcare workers gathered in the eastern DRC city of Bunia on Tuesday for the burial of a doctor who died while treating Ebola patients. This is the president of the Ituri Medical Association.
We are indeed afraid. We're seriously afraid because all of us are supposed to take care for the sick. Today there are sick people coming in. Tomorrow there'll be more sick people coming. We are afraid. We're really afraid. But we cannot abandon the sick because we're afraid. We've taken an oath. We will treat them. We will treat them, but while respecting the preventative measures.
The Trump administration is pushing
Just
a
like
new non-disclosure agreement that would apply.
Truly heroic. Just saying, like, we don't even really know what to do, but like we have to keep doing our job. Also, people who are already experiencing genocide and just extraction of natural resources, human exploitation at just mind-boggling degrees that are only getting worse with this outbreak of disease, and also how with the rise in AI that there's even more of this call for extracting resources from the DRC.
To all federal workers. The Office of Personnel Management posted a draft to the Federal Register on Tuesday, prohibiting workers from disclosing non-public, confidential, or proprietary information. It would also bar them from sharing sensitive internal materials not currently available to the public. The draft goes beyond standard classified and unclassified categories of information. The new rule targets leaks to news outlets and would broaden non-disclosure agreements already in place at the Pentagon and other federal agencies. Esha Bhandari, director of the American Civil Liberties Union Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, said, quote, such broad gag orders would leave the public in the dark about how the government works, preventing the kind of informed debate that's critical to democratic accountability. The government cannot shroud itself in secrecy in a democracy, unquote. A federal court blocked Alabama from using its new congressional map in this year's midterm elections, ruling it intentionally discriminates against black voters. The three-judge panel wrote in their ruling, quote, we cannot see our way clear to requiring Alabamians to cast their votes in the 2026 elections under a districting plan tainted by intentional race-based discrimination, unquote. More than 1 in 4 residents of Alabama are black. Alabama's attorney general vowed to appeal the ruling to the Supreme Court, which last month struck down Louisiana's majority black congressional districts. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, the state Senate wrapped up its session Tuesday without voting on a new congressional map that would have dismantled the state's only majority black district. South Carolina's lawmakers quietly defied pressure from President Trump and the GOP to join the ongoing redistricting battle ahead of the midterm elections. And in Texas, the state's Attorney General Ken Paxton, backed by President Trump, defeated 4-term incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the Republican Senate primary runoff Tuesday. Paxton has previously been indicted on charges of felony securities fraud and was impeached from office on allegations of bribery, dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice, and abuse of public trust. Paxton is the first primary challenger to defeat an incumbent U.S. senator from Texas since at least 1980.
Of course.
The Republican candidate spent nearly
what normally would be
$130
disqualified
million
is qualified for
in U.S. history.
fascist double stuffed,
State
meaning
Representative
Republicans.
James Talarico in the general election in November. And those are some of the headlines.
The Democrats
This
are
is
fascist
Democracy
white.
Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And
Thanks, Amy. If you aren't already subscribed, do so to Democracy Now! They do some really great reporting there, independent reporting. I wasn't able, I mean, I know many people have not been able to like get tickets, or there are very few viewings of Steal This Story. The documentary that is on Amy Goodman that came out recently. I guess there are even more showings in New York City and LA. Surprise, surprise. But yeah, it's wild how there are people who can understand that they don't like what's going on, that they tend to think it's just like a Trump thing, rather than seeing this like whole rotted system that got us to this place to begin with. And them wanting to like police people's behavior is part of the problem. It's like when people are not like, when they are resisting in ways that are actually effective, but because of all of these like respectability politics and nonsense. Like, there was a situation that happened where I was connecting an organizer to some labor leaders. These labor leaders, of course, like, you have respect that is hard won when you are involved in labor organizing. And like, people who are looked to as leaders often like take that. And this isn't necessarily like the case every single time. Like, there can still be like exploitation and like assholes and stuff. But like, a lot of the time, people are much more likely to be staunch advocates for the people they're representing when it comes to labor organizers, because they feel that responsibility where things are done in a much more democratic way. And there was this other person that came in just like with so much privilege, and like, I'm not super familiar with him, but like, the way he was like framing something, I was like, oh, you sound like you're part of a union. Like, do you know these people? Like, we could like do something here, like, without getting into too many details. And like, the way that there are people that feel the entitlement to like come into spaces and like, okay, you need to do this, I need to do this, and then like all of our people need to do this, while like completely ignoring that like workers are on the front lines of experiencing the conditions that are difficult that people are in, and that they're also the first to experience repercussions of action that are not done in that. Like, you have to take these precautions in order to protect people. That's like what good leadership is. And then after like that same person who was like showing a lot of privilege was like, I can't go into any spaces. People just say that I'm like too straight and white and male and no one wants to listen to me. And I'm like, you do realize you sound like the people you claim to be up against, right? Like, you sound like these white supremacists that are like, oh, like you're attacking us like a straight white man. That's like, how about like sit down and shut the fuck up occasionally? That like you act like a baby when you're not centered in every single space that you enter. Like, mind-boggling. Okay, I'll stop venting. I just am like, how do we get anything done? How do we do anything that's like meaningful without like having people try to like co-opt movements for some sort of like self-aggrandizing, like fame searching activity that I'm like, this is I feel like we're fucked in so many ways, but especially when like, yeah, when people often confuse the situation of being loudest as being a leader. And like often being a leader is like shutting the fuck up and listening. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, clearly, but there you go. It's some neoliberal fascism stuff, but there we go. I did want to watch some of this. Let's see. Just getting more information on the flotilla activists. And then cover a little bit of what's happening nationally, and then we'll get into Banned Book Club. Something that's going to still be discussing difficult subject matter, but in a way that I think is also uplifting and heartening. So there we go. Anyway, maybe I shouldn't have gone on that like diatribe, but whatever.
Now, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy.
Oh, whoops. Let's refresh.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Israel's deported hundreds of activists who they abducted from the Global Samud flotilla as the convoy of humanitarian aid ships sailed toward Gaza, attempting to break Israel's siege. The activists were imprisoned for days, have described torture and sexual violence by Israeli soldiers during their time in custody. Many reported broken ribs and other injuries. This is Australian activist Juliette Lamont speaking from Sydney after being deported from Israel.
I was dragged into a darkened container ship on a prison boat. I was sexually assaulted. I was beaten. And that was just the beginning of 4 days of absolute hell. I've looked into the eyes of the most soulless people in the universe, and nothing came back. These people need to be stopped.
Meanwhile, in Spain, activists from the Global Samud flotilla were beaten by police officers, Basque police officers, at Bilbao airport Saturday after they returned home from being intercepted at sea and abducted by Israeli forces while attempting to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza. At least 4 people were arrested after members of the autonomous police force for Spain's Basque country, known as the Ertzaintza, used batons to attack activists, family members, and supporters who gathered to pose for pictures. The police violence drew attention to 1.66 million euros worth of security contracts. That's about $1.9 million between Basque police forces and an Israeli firm run by a former Mossad agent to provide body armor, surveillance technology, and tactical training courses to the Basque police. This comes as Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has been barred from entering France. France's foreign ministry cited his incitement of hatred and violence against Palestinians, unquote, as well as video he shared last week showing him taunting dozens of activists from the Global Samud flotilla who've been abducted by the Israeli forces, pushed to the ground face first with their hands bound behind their backs. For more, we're joined by two guests. Here in New York, Alex Colston, U.S. citizen.
People wonder why there's like a
returned home
distrust
Sunday after
of
3 days in Israeli custody. He was covering the flotilla for Zateo.
cops,
This is his second
surveillance,
time participating
body
in Gaza's
cameras,
humanitarian
people who
flotilla.
are.
In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Haitham Arafat, Palestinian-American activist, flotilla participant, but his head's
I know this specifically is talking about like the evil perpetuated by the IDF and genocidal policies, like with Zionism. But of course, like this isn't unique. This isn't something that has like just happened. That, you know, history has shown that when people are trying to create or are creating ethno states, like in India, of like with Hindutva, of talking about how there are these hierarchies of human dignity that must be enforced. Like that is in and of itself violence, creating these hierarchies, and why it lends itself to violence being necessary in order to uphold these other forms of violence. That it's like, how can, like, all of this is connected. Of like what is done overseas always comes back to the US, but also like the more these places are able to get away with this shit, the more it feels like to other places who are interested in pursuing these same kinds of tactics and ends that they are justified in doing so and that they won't be stopped.
slammed into the ground when Israeli forces detained him. Haitham was born in Gaza. Over 100 members of his family have been killed in Israeli strikes since October 7th, 2023. Alex, let's begin with you. I just described what Ben-Gvir did, and now he's been barred from entering France. You were there. Can you talk about first what happened to you on the high seas, and then what happened when you were brought to Israel?
Thanks for having me, Amy. On the high seas, I mean, we were intercepted about 250 nautical miles from the shores of Gaza. It took them, I think, about a day to get all the boats. And
how many?
How many boats? 52 boats, and around 400, 500 participants all told. And as we, when the Israelis board the ships, they typically do so in a violent fashion. They shoot immediately with rubber bullets if we do not stop the ships. They tend to, in my case, they tied my zip tied my hands behind my back, and they put us in stress positions on the boat.
A stress position as well.
Meaning that they make us sit on our knees with our heads on the ground, or foreheads on the ground, can't move. And they often give these kinds of contradictory orders. Well, they'll say sit up, go down, sit up, go down. If you do the opposite of either, they'll beat you in some way or another. But the way that they board the vessels is they typically board, they abduct us, they commandeer the ship, and they take us to.
Which this is a common tactic by, you know, especially like cops, military, who are not interested in actually doing things in a humane way. They are sending these conflicting messages intentionally because they want to brutalize people as a show of force and dominance.
In this case, a prison boat. And this happened previously in the mission as well, west of Crete, but there are, I think, 2 prison boats this time. And when they're on the prison ships, it's kind of like a shanty town or like a strange, like containerized area to traffic us back to Israel. And on those prison ships, and then within Qidsiya prison and in Ashdod port, they go out of the Israelis have gone out of their way to beat and abuse the flotilla participants. In the case of Ben-Gvir's appearance, he did this the previous time too when we were in Ashdod. One thing I find kind of ironic is that when the Israeli Foreign Ministry or any of Israeli officials talk about us, they call us provocateurs, or they say we're terrorists, we're committed to provocation. And yet, whenever Ben-Gvir shows up to these things, he's the one provoking us. He's there saying we're terrorists. He's saying that we're
He brings a camera crew with him?
Yes, he tends to bring a camera crew with him. And in fact, the previous time I saw him do this, there's one person sort of just shooting film of him, and he's talking to the camera. And it might as well be that we're not even there in some respects, because he's doing it for Israeli consumption. He's filming these antics and these smears of the flotilla participants for the Israeli public. And then this time we were in this tent, and I would say that my experience in the tent was quite harrowing. A person a foot away from me clearly had broken ribs, was holding them, and was moaning, and I tried to go help him, and every time I would move, they would kick me or they'd pull me back, and they would set me back down on my knees and head, and I could hear screaming the whole time we were in the tent. They indiscriminately brutalized people in that tent. Meanwhile, as Ben-Gvir shows up, and the thing is that I could not see Ben-Gvir, but I'm sitting forward, and I can hear someone talking behind me.
You mean with your head on the ground?
Yeah, my head, yeah. So I
and your hands behind you, zip tied?
Yes, and I couldn't turn around and see, but I'm in a clump of bodies, a row of bodies. I'm just hearing like one by one saying Ben-Gvir's here, Ben-Gvir's here, yada yada. And I think in that instant, this time around, I realized like they are just being way more severe this time, and I didn't know what was in store when we went onwards to Qidsiya.
And Alex, there was another boat that some of the activists named a torture boat. You were not on that one, but what have you heard about what happened there?
So the first people I talked to when I got on the Turkish plane back to Istanbul is I listened to accounts from people on the torture boat, and I was told immediately that up to 35 people's ribs were fractured. I heard that at least 12, if not 15 people have been sexually assaulted. People told me that that some had been injected with syringes of unknown substances. We don't know what those were. We were told that people were made to lie down into like puddles of water and told not to move, and they were afraid they might suffocate in that position. They dropped flashbangs, they shot rubber bullets, and as I've described it in previous interviews, these container ships, we're in a courtyard. We can't go anywhere. You can't run away from Israeli guards who are shooting at you. You can take refuge maybe in the container ship, but then the Israelis would call out the participants to go into the courtyard with their guns drawn. So there was a certain kind of like, just like not only sadism, but trying to like torture us with like not being sure what they were going to do to us, like drawing us out, giving us contradictory orders, like finding any pretense and pretext to brutalize us and to keep us fearful of what they might do to us.
We're also joined by Haitham Arafat, a Palestinian American who has lost over 100 members of his family in Gaza since October 7th. Haitham, welcome to Democracy Now! You were on the flotilla. What happened with you?
I mean, Alex pretty much explained a lot of the things that happened. But I would like to add one thing, is that when Ben Gvir came to our cell, I looked at him at the eyes. And you can tell that this guy has pleasure at us in these positions. They put us in cages. These cages were 3 meters by 6 meters. And I counted at one point, we had more than 80 people. They keep adding more people, and there was no place for us to sit. At one point, we decided to stand because there is no space, and they came and they started beating us, and we had to sit down. There's no space, so we started sitting on each other, on the top of each other. There was a guy behind me when we were after the tent, they got us from the port. And he was, I mean, he did not speak Arabic. I do speak Arabic, so I do know some of the words. And they asked him where he's from, and he was from Southeast Asia. And then they asked him to repeat, I am a fag, I am a fag. And they made him repeat that so many times. And when he stops, they come and beat him, and they tell him, continue. And then he called his friends, and they started actually taking pictures with that guy. This is a system that is not, I mean, it's a sick system. And when we talk about Ben Gvir as if it's an isolated incident, it's not. This is, the Palestinians have been slaughtered and killed for over 80 years. And each administration comes and increases. They brag about killing Palestinians. This is, our blood is becoming an election material for them. Who kills more Palestinians gets elected. So what we have seen there in the prison, I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Alex said, but I can add one thing, is that this is a system that was carefully designed to not to humiliate, not to deter, not to insult. This system, the process that they have there in the jail, was designed to break you as a human. It's designed to make you a human animal. And I think, based on I've seen the reaction of some of the people who were with us in these cages in the concentration camps. It's not a jail; it's a concentration camp. I think I've seen the reaction of some people. I don't think people can go through that process for a long time, and that was what they have there in place. Now, one thing I'm disgusted at: France banned Ben Gvir. Now, why? Because there's a picture about him, but we know about this. He's been doing this for years. Why now? Why that guy is still free? Walking and nobody is, he's not on the sanction list of the US. Why the people who are defending the Palestinians are on the sanction list, and these terrorists, these war criminals, are walking free and protected. Not only they are protected, they are protected by our tax dollars.
Can I ask you, Haitham, yes. You showed them your US passport?
Yes, I did.
They slammed your head against the ground?
Yes. They do not care. I mean, they were trying, my name is Middle Eastern, so they were trying to find my background, and I did not volunteer any information. But they were trying to speak to me in Arabic languages with insults and cussing words. And I would just ignore them as much as possible because I did not want to escalate the situation. Even though I tried to do that, but every time I have a ruptured disc, so I cannot be in these stress positions for a long time. The minute I try to raise my head, they come and start hitting me. They do not care whether you are young, old, woman. We have grandfathers, grandmothers, women, mothers.
You were born in Gaza and have lost over 100 members of your family. Can you talk about some of them?
I mean, the first time I remember that I was in Gaza 1 year before the October 7, and I was on my way to Gaza during October 7.
This is just horrific. I wish I like Amy as a reporter, but I wish she wasn't interrupting him as much, or that they had allotted him more time so that he could be speaking a little more freely.
The first incident, which was actually, I was on my way to the airport in Egypt when my uncle called me and he said, yeah, your aunt was killed. Because I was with my aunt at that time. I stayed with her and we had beautiful time with her. She was like a second mom to me. She was with her doctor and they bombed that house. And I remember I was in Egypt and they called us. They said they just bombed our house, but it was, I think, a tank shell. So the second floor was destroyed. And they decided to move to the second house. And they called us. They said, what shall we do? We told them, hey, guys, it's the best place is to find a good shelter and just stay there. Do not move. But that house was bombed. So they had to move to my aunt's house. Waited for the morning. While they waited, it was a grandmother daughters, grandkids, babies. They walked together to the second house, which is about 15 minutes. There was a tank at the end of the road. This tank, once they saw them, they saw a family walking of innocent civilians. They just turned at them. And what they did, they pressed the button and they bombed them. 3 of them killed immediately. Few of them bled to death for 2 weeks because they were unable to go to the hospital and ambulances were unable to come to them. They had the mother of the babies were killed at that time and she was breastfeeding. They didn't have milk for the babies. This is what we are going through. And now we are putting Ben Gvir, a band from France, and he still can come to the US. How many more Palestinians needs to be killed before we do something?
I wanted to ask Alex Colston, the news out of Spain, when some of the flotilla participants arrived in Bilbao airport, the riot police in the Basque area of the country attacked the supporters that were at the airport. Your response, especially given the fact that Spain, the national government, has been so outspoken in its criticism of what Israel is doing?
Well, as was mentioned at the top of the segment, the Basque police trains with the IDF, they train with Israeli forces. So maybe perhaps on one level I'm not all that surprised. And yet, of course, these are activists who had just been detained and tortured in Israeli custody. And then the moment they're coming back home to see their friends and their family, they are again brutalized by the police. The way this incident apparently started, as far as I understand it, is that one of the family members and friends were trying to go to the activists, and the police stood in their way. And so the activists walked up to try to see the family member and to get the police to move away, and then there was an altercation. You know, the thing is that many police forces across the world train with Israeli forces, the same forces that tortured us in Kitsia prison and on the prison boat, including the NYPD. There has been well-documented cooperative mutual collaboration between the NYPD and Israeli forces. So there's a global police force that is in many ways trained by the Israelis, and the Israelis use the tactics that they have invented on the Palestinians, and yet then they train police forces across the world to inflict the same kinds of violence on other civilians. And so when I saw this video, I thought to myself, well, this is actually the same kinds of police violence that used with the same kinds of tactics then used in the Basque region. So.
Well, we're going to link to your work at Zateo. Alex Colston, Zateo reporter, U.S. citizen and flotilla participant who just returned home to the United States on Sunday. And we thank Haitham Arafat, a Palestinian-American activist, also flotilla participant born in Gaza, who's lost 100 members of his family since October 7th, 2023. To see all our coverage of the flotilla, you can go to democracynow.org. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube.
Yeah, I think they could have given him more time. Also, just the repetition of how many family members he's lost, of like, I understand that is a lot and it's important to be talking about, but they aren't just like numbers to him, you know? Anyway, so it is Eid. All of this is happening. Eid Mubarak to people who celebrate. And, you know, like the world does not stop. The cruelty of the world does not stop for people who are celebrating Eid, but particularly Palestinians. So they're experiencing just horrible circumstances, which is why we need to continue with the BDS movement of boycotting, divesting, sanctioning, and prosecuting the Israeli state and these war criminals, because it's not just these individuals. Like, there's a lot of focus individually on Ben Gvir and Netanyahu. Like, they're horrible human beings. Like, to be clear, that is just real. But they are a product, as that gentleman was saying, they are a product of this 80-year campaign that is about ethnic cleansing and genocide. That they are a manifestation of not having any sort of restraint be put on them on this just incredibly violent government that is not going to stop until we make them stop, until the world just utterly repudiates what's happening. And we see that people all over the world understand what's going on. Like, people in the working class especially, and, you know, people who are Muslim are very aware, especially with, like, Islamophobia in the world. And especially people who are experiencing marginalization, understand that, like, with seeing all of these tactics be executed, that they're like, yeah, we see this in our own communities. Our communities are under occupation with police forces that are trained by the IDF. So, like, what else can you expect? Why is it that people continue to be surprised when law enforcement are using excessive force? That's what they're trained to do. Okay. Moving along, I did want to get to I'm just looking through some of the stuff that I have planned. I did want to show this about how Jeff Bezos a little bit ago or a few days ago gave an interview that was like, yeah, like with his dead shark eyes. He was like, yeah, people are upset and, you know, like working people like aren't getting paid enough. Like, okay, then maybe stop union busting and pay your workers more for Amazon and like better their working circumstances so that they don't have to like pee in bottles when they don't get work breaks and stuff. Like, this is what I call a guillotine interference. He's running guillotine interference because he realizes just how upset everyone is about billionaires, and that he's like, yeah, it's like what politicians try to say and like demonize certain people. Like, okay, so what are you doing each and every day with your exorbitant wealth that is blood money, you know? So he did this ridiculous interview trying to run guillotine interference, and I did see this Miss Now, Miss Never segment. That's MS Now, formerly known as MSNBC. I call them Miss Never. That Bernie Sanders and Graham Plattner gave some statements here. I can have continued issues with both Bernie and Graham Plattner. I think Bernie has been forgiven way too often for his foreign policy votes. He's only recently started calling what's happening in Palestine a genocide. Like, that was like a couple weeks ago. Graham Plattner, I think he was largely forgiven way too quickly about his Nazi tattoo. But what people are not also talking about at the same time with Graham Plattner is that he was like, yeah, I was checked by the military and no one said anything. I was checked for like hate tattoos and like gang tattoos and stuff. And it's like, yeah, that is a larger commentary on the US military that we need to be talking about, because there are a lot of white supremacists and Nazis that are in the military. They're drawn to these types of occupations a lot of the time, like the police force, for example, because they want this power difference. They want this power imbalance. And it does not bring in the best of us. Let's just put it that way. There is a reason why there are so many Klansmen that are in these high-ranking positions in law enforcement, in the government, why the Trump administration actively is removing funding from the Southern Poverty Law Center, who actively investigates the KKK. So there we go. That's my speech.
Bernie Sanders is
After this, we'll get into the Bluest eye, because we need a hell of a palate cleanser. Which this isn't to say that like us just happening to view what is going on is not nearly as hard or harmful as what people are experiencing in these situations, just to be clear.
Independent Vermont. He caucuses with the Democrats. Graham Plattner is Democratic Senator for...
Okay. Let's refresh this bitch and keep going.
Senator Bernie Sanders is an independent Vermont. He caucuses with the Democrats. Graham Plattner is Democratic Senator for candidate for the Senate from Maine. They have been out together as part of the Fighting Oligarchy Tour. They have an event tonight after our show. It's good to see you both, gentlemen. Mr. Butler, let me just start with you. Today, of course, is Memorial Day. People are observing. There's people barbecuing, and there's people commemorating folks and thinking about what this day means. And obviously, someone who's served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, someone who's spoken incredibly movingly, I have to say, just personally, very movingly about your experience of that, of being in those wars, just how you're feeling and what you're thinking about today on this Memorial Day.
Yeah, I think that also, like, he's talked about how he has, like, he became disenchanted with, like, the military, that even before he joined, he wasn't sure about it, but not talking about the U.S. military, just, like, them actively being war criminals. Like, we need to normalize talking about them in that way.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us, Chris. And this morning, actually, Senator Sanders was gracious enough to honor the town of Sullivan, Maine, which is my hometown, to join us at our Memorial Day event. Memorial Day is always a complicated day, I think, for those of us who saw a lot of combat. It's a day where we want to remember, and we need to not forget those who made the ultimate sacrifice. But as you mentioned, it's also a day which a lot of people in our society treat as like a holiday. And that's always a little complicated, I think, for those of us who remember our friends who we lost. It's also, quite frankly, at this day and age, a reminder that the best way for us to honor those who have sacrificed for this country is to not create more opportunities for government to waste people's lives like we are seeing in the war.
Hello. I mean, that's a good point.
I'll
give
very
him
much
that.
believe that we need to take moments like today and realize that we have a resource in this country, and the young men and women who are willing to serve it, and it cannot be squandered lightly. And I very much believe that we need to build a politics in the future that takes it seriously enough to not start wars like Iraq or Afghanistan or what's happening in Iran, and realize that the best respect that we can show is by only using it in times when absolutely necessary.
Senator, you've spent a lot of time on the Veterans Committee in the United States Senate, and veteran services and healthcare has been an issue that has been very,
I was like, why is this so slow?
For your
It's normal pace. I'm going to speed this up too.
career in the legislature, both in the House and the Senate. Your thoughts, particularly as we get some news that maybe there isn't a deal to end the kind of frozen conflict with Iran right now?
Well, certainly, I hope that there will be. The problem is we have a president who lies all of the time, and it's hard to know what is true and what is not true. But, going back to what Graham just said, I'm thinking about my generation, where we experienced the war in Vietnam. 59,000 plus young men died. Many more died after they came home on the streets, drug addiction, etc. And that was a war based on a lie, as was the war in Iraq. And we need a foreign policy which is designed to improve life for people all over the world, to do our best to make sure that we do not have these never-ending wars that we're now seeing in Iran, and which honors and respects the men and women who are prepared to sacrifice their lives to make sure that they do not have to put their lives on the line in wars that should not be fought.
The title for the event, the tour, Senator Sanders, that you've been on, called the Fighting Oligarchy Tour. This is one of those stops. I think one of the people I think that you would consider an oligarch, and I think probably fits the textbook definition, would be Jeff Bezos. Of course, one or two richest men in the world, depending on what the stock is doing that day. And there's been an interesting debate that's opened up about taxes, about tax fairness. Particularly different Democrats have had different proposals about tax fairness. And I want to play something he said about his own tax verdict and get your response, Mr. Plattner, and yours, Senator Sanders. This is what he had to say about the idea of doubling his taxes and that it wouldn't really help very much. Take a listen.
If people want me to pay more billions, then let's have that debate. But don't pretend, that's going to solve the problem. You could double the taxes I pay, and it's not going to help that teacher in Queens. I promise you.
Oh, I think it's abject nonsense.
Yeah.
I think that's what somebody says when they don't want to see their taxes go up. There's
Yep.
absolutely no question that if we target the wealth where it has been
It certainly would help that teacher in
pull it back
Queens.
into our system and put it into social programs like healthcare, like childcare, like paying teachers what they are worth, we will absolutely improve the lives of working Americans and, quite frankly, improve our society as a whole. It's, I think what he is pitching is propaganda. It's meant to protect himself and protect his crony friends. And we're going to come after them for it.
Senator, he also pivoted to an idea of cutting taxes. No one in the bottom 50% would pay any taxes. There's been a lot of Democrats, interestingly, proposing things along that line, big exemptions at the bottom. I think Senator Booker has a version, Senator Van Hollen. People I think who talk about this progressive. Congresswoman AOC has come out against it, saying, look, the best way that we build a kind of society and tax system that works for all is that everyone's paying in and everyone's benefiting, more like what we see around Social Security, Medicare, more what we see in Europe. Where are you on that?
Well, what I know is that today we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had in the history of this country, much worse than the so-called Gilded Age. And I know that at a time when the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 93%, when people like Bezos and Musk own more wealth than, so many Americans combined. Musk himself owns more wealth than the bottom 53% of American households. Meanwhile, the effective tax rate of billionaires is lower than that of a nurse or a truck driver. So, of course, we need to demand that the wealthiest people in this country, the billionaire class, start paying their fair share of taxes, which is why I've introduced legislation calling for a 5% annual tax on the wealth of billionaires. That's less than 1,000 Americans. And Chris, if we do that, we raise enough revenue to provide a $3,000 check for every man, woman, and child in families under 150,000. We can make sure that everybody who was thrown off of health care by Trump gets reinstated. And we can do enormous things for the American people. The point is, there is so much inequality right now that taxes on billionaires can transform life for the working class of this country, which is right now struggling to pay the bills.
Mr. Plattner, you're trying to make the case to the folks in your home state of Maine to vote out a five-term incumbent, someone who's been a real, I think it's fair to say, an institution in Maine life, and comes from a sort of political family and has been there for a very long time, probably has name recognition north of 99%, I think it's fair to say, in Maine, who has beaten back other challenges. Why do you think, what is different this time? What is the case for why Mainers should turn away from someone who has been such an institution in that state through Democratic and Republican institutions?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, because as an institution, she has overseen the deterioration of material conditions for working people in this state. I mean, where we are today is worse than where we were when she entered the Senate. We have fewer hospitals. We have fewer schools. Housing has become an abject nightmare for younger people in the state, and elderly for that matter. We have seen people living on fixed incomes see their benefits continue to stay small while the price of everything else goes up. She has been in the U.S. Senate through all of this. And more importantly, she has votes on her record, time and time again, that show that she is not willing to go out of her way to either stand up to Donald Trump, stand up to the Republican Party, or stand up on behalf of the working people in her state.
Yeah, she usually is like, oh, I think he's learned his lesson. Uh-huh. Sure, bitch. Sure he has, because that's what happens with fascists, especially when they're drunk on power. They learn. They do self-reflection. Okay. Let's get into the bluest eye, shall we? Sorry for that rant earlier. I probably shouldn't have said that. I'm very much a believer of saying things to their faces, which I have. But also if there are any sort of tactics that work with organizing that we can somehow mind meld and figure out to help our cause globally, that is definitely appreciated. If anyone has any good experiences and tactics that they feel like they work. Okay. So going to The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This just as I said before, continually reminds me why art is important. Not only just art, but her art. This is banned because one, it's really good, and it's also a critique of these very oppressive systems. And that for this next section, because I'm going to page 22, 15 to 22, or 23, because that's where we're at with this book, folks. It is just so packed with meaning that it's we have to take it much slower than other things. We started out with The Giver, which is, I guess, young adult, maybe not young adult, children's fiction. And so engaging with something that actually has more text, actually more words, but also just more to engage with, I think it is necessary to slow down a little bit. Okay, so for this section, something that I love that it opens with is talking about how these kids who are 9 and 10, Frida and Claudia, that they can't possibly understand everything that these adults are saying, but that they try to pick up on these cues to understand what they're saying, of like emphasizing how like kids pick up on a lot more than what adults want to admit. Especially kids that have grown up in situations where it's been necessary to be extremely observant for safety, and also just to make it so that they can keep going, just be in their environment and have information to go off of. That's helpful. So like, for instance, this sentence says, "We cannot know the meanings of all their words, for we are 9 and 10 years old. So we watch their faces, their hands, their feet, and listen for truth in timbre." So when Mr. Henry arrived, he's the boarder that's coming to live with their family, arrived on a Saturday night, we smelled him. He smelled wonderful, like trees and lemon, vanishing cream, and new Nile hair oil and flecks of sensen. So, new Nile hair oil, I couldn't remember, because I know it's part of this like Murray's like hair oil brand that was specifically marketed to Black people in America for hair care and styling, but I couldn't remember which one came first. And then I found this video, it's a Facebook video, go figure, that places it in history. So let's give this a watch.
The entire family of brands. I know we have been focusing our attention on the Murray's 100
Get the sound going.
But let's talk about the growth and development of the entire family of brands. Did you know that Murray's is not the oldest brand in the portfolio? Peerless Products Company, the maker of New Nile pomade, which still exists today, was based in Jersey City, New Jersey. Peerless Products was officially registered for business in 1924, roughly the same time the early versions of Murray's pomade was entering the market. You have to realize that in the 20s and 30s, the products offered were on a much more regionalized basis. There was not chain stores, Amazon on the internet. It was much more difficult to get products. Mr. B was one of the first to solve that problem, but we will get to that in a future story. At this point in our timeline, we have very little information on exactly when Murray's purchased Peerless products, but we are quite sure it happened in the mid-60s, once Murray's was already established. While we are currently hunting for more information on this part of our story, we're asking for any of our online sleuths for more information. If you guys can figure this out, let us know and we will update this on our future videos. Like I said before, in 100 years, you can forget as much as you learn. It's your boy, Robert Courtney. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really profound statement as well. Are there comments? Oh, nope. I'm not willing to log in. So there you go. So they're saying that Mr. Henry, he smells like new Nile hair oil and flecks of sensen. Sensen is this older candy that was a breath freshener. It is similar to licorice. It's made with anise. Sensens were available in small packets or cardboard boxes, similar to a matchbox of the time. An inner box slid out from a cardboard sleeve, revealing a small hole from which the tiny sensen squares would fall when the box was shaken. Yeah, so there are licorice with anise, gum arabic, maltodextrin sugar, and natural and artificial flavors. Sensen is mentioned in the song You Got Trouble in the musical The Music Man as a means for young people to conceal the smell of beer and cigarettes from their parents. So this is placing us in a time and area. So like as he mentioned in this video, that a lot of things, especially back in the day before the internet, things were sold on a very regional basis. So Toni Morrison is known to be utterly meticulous with her research for her books, her word choice, as we have seen, Have any of you read Toni Morrison? Any of her books? Doesn't have to be The Bluest Eye, but just out of curiosity. So it is saying that, like, maybe he smokes, maybe he drinks on occasion, but it's also like a way to freshen his breath, that he smells like he takes care of himself, that he's like concerned or like aware of and has access to some resources for this kind of self-care. They like him immediately, and they say, to our surprise, he spoke to us. They were expecting him to ignore these two girls. And he said, "Hello there. You must be Greta Garbo, and you must be Ginger Rogers." We giggled. Even my father was startled into a smile. "Want a penny?" He held out a shiny coin to us. Frida lowered her head, too pleased to answer. I reached for it. He snapped his thumb and forefinger, and the penny disappeared. Our shock was laced with delight. We searched all over him, poking our fingers into his socks, looking up in the inside of his coat. If happiness is anticipation with certainty, we were happy. Just throwing out a sentence like that, like, what? If happiness is anticipation with certainty, that, like, part of happiness is knowing that, like, it doesn't last, but also having this awareness that, like, it's happening in the moment. Or, like, it is a time where you know that you will reach this larger feeling of happiness, that, like, you have a certainty about it, and that, like, the anticipation of it can, like, heighten that sense where it's actually having these juxtaposing feelings of understanding that you can't have happiness without having, like, the absence of it as well. So this is, I wanted to show some pictures of Greta Garbo and Ginger Rogers. This is Greta Garbo. She was a silent film actress. She was known to be like one of, like, in the height of Hollywood in the golden age. She was also known to be like a fashion icon, a beauty icon. I think, was she Swedish? Let's see. But anyway, like, very blonde, these, like, very pencil thin eyebrows, these white beauty standards. So he's comparing them to people who were known to be, like, the most beautiful actresses at the time. But of course, they were viewed as the most beautiful because proximity to whiteness, these blonde-haired, blue-eyed women who, oh, she was Swedish. Did I say that? Maybe I did. But how these women were viewed as, like, the pinnacle of beauty, and how they were able to be viewed that way, like I mentioned before, is because of these Eurocentric beauty standards, but also because there was not representation with acting, that you could actually have some dark-skinned women, some black women who were being shown as the pinnacle of beauty. We're still dealing with this racial construct, clearly, but also these ideas about beauty standards, like, as we've seen how Lupita Nyong'o, she is playing Helen of Troy in, is it Helen of Troy? In the latest Odyssey? I think so. Wait, I'm gonna look that up real quick. The Odyssey. Yes. So she's Helen of Troy, who is known to be, here we go. Elle has its own issues with, like, beauty standards and such. The Odyssey star says her character is representative of the world, which, like, the Odyssey is fiction, by the way. There's, like, cyclops seas. There's a cyclops in it. There are, like, mermaids and stuff. So it's, like, it's not real. But, like, Elon Musk specifically has come out and been like, how can she be, like, be the pinnacle of beauty? This isn't even accurate to the time. There's Tiana Taylor. gorgeous. But how, like, we're still dealing with this, where he's like, she's not beautiful enough, or she's not in this area. That's like, so you only care because she's not white. That's really what it is. But it's stunning. And she's such a phenomenal actor as well, that it's like, okay, this is why it's still relevant, this book. Why it also is continued to be banned, because of these concepts of dealing very directly with these oppressive structures. So this is Ginger Rogers. She actually kind of looks like Slater here, if you know who that is. But she was famous for being an actress and a dancer especially, but often people don't really know about her solo work. They most often pair her with Fred Astaire, who was her often her dancing partner, that they would be in movies together. So Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, his name was always said first. A lot of people thought that she was actually more talented of a dancer than he was, but of course, as a man, he was getting more notice. So that, like, even in this system where she is benefiting from having proximity to whiteness with these Eurocentric beauty standards of blonde hair, blue eyes, being especially thin, that, like, she was still living in patriarchy, which deals directly with the very first opening of the book, where they're talking about this little blonde, blue-eyed white girl that they want to beat up because she is looking at them with, like, so much hatred and arrogance in her eyes, but also, like, they understand that the same girl is being abused. And so, like, how when people are abused by these larger systems, how often they want to impose their own kind of dominance on people who don't have as much privilege or proximity to these power structures. Okay, we'll hold there for just a sec. Going back to the book. So that section ends with, "We loved him," meaning Mr. Henry. "Even after what came later, there was no bitterness in our memory of him. She slept in the bed with us, freed on the outside because she is brave. It never occurs to her that if in her sleep her hand hangs over the edge of the bed, something will crawl out from under it and bite her fingers off." Which, that is, like, such a great observation of, like, when you're kids, how you grow up, like, if you've ever had to, like, share a bed with someone, that, like, whoever is taking the spot against the wall, they want to be there because it feels safer, and the person on the outside is like, well, what if someone comes in? And then you're on the outside, that person's viewed as being braver. So Piccola, she's not their sister, but she's coming to live with them. And so they're saying that she sleeps in the middle of them. And this is also symbolic for what's going to happen later in the story. But they are talking about her dad in these terms, Piccola's dad in these terms that are not good. That, like, even if the girls, like they mentioned before, can't understand everything that the adults are saying, they do understand the tone, and that he is talked about in ways that are much worse than some other people. So here is a quote here. "We were to be nice to her and not fight," meaning Piccola. "Mama didn't know what got into people, but that old dog Breedlove had burned up his house, gone upside his wife's head, and everybody, as a result, was outdoors. Outdoors, we knew, was the real terror of life. The threat of being outdoors surfaced frequently in those days. Every possibility of excess was curtailed with it. If somebody ate too much, he could end up outdoors. If somebody used too much coal, he could end up outdoors. People could gamble themselves outdoors, drink themselves outdoors. Sometimes mothers put their sons outdoors, and when that happened, regardless of what the son had done, all sympathy was with him. He was outdoors, and his own flesh had done it. To be put outdoors by a landlord was one thing. Unfortunate, but an aspect of life over which you had no control, since you could not control your income. Yes, so this is also why this book is probably banned. Like, talking about how, like, something like someone's income and like their housing is not always in their control. But to be slack enough to put oneself outdoors, or heartless enough to put one's own kin outdoors, that was criminal. There is a difference between being put out and being put outdoors. If you are put out, you go somewhere else. If you are outdoors, there is no place to go. The distinction was subtle, but final. Outdoors was the end of something, an irrevocable physical fact, defining and complementing our physical condition, metaphysical condition. Being a minority in both caste and class, so also love that she's referencing caste, that is very real in the US, but we don't call it that a lot of the time. We moved about anyway on the hem of life, struggling to consolidate our weaknesses and hang on, or to creep singly up into the major folds of the garment. Okay, and then moving along, she's saying, dead doesn't change, and outdoors is here to stay. Knowing that there was such a thing as outdoors bred in us a hunger for property, for ownership. So understanding that there is this concept of having and not having, that it is within this framework of capitalism and class. Hello, Stuart Little is my son. Welcome. The firm possession of a yard, a porch, a grape arbor, propertied black people spent all their energies all their love on their nests. Like frenzied, desperate birds, they overdecorated everything, fussed and fidgeted over their hard-won homes. Canned, jellied, and preserved all summer to fill the cupboards and shelves. They painted, picked, and poked at every corner of their houses. And those houses loomed like hothouse sunflowers among the rows of weeds that were the rented houses. Hello, Linton. Welcome. How are you doing? We're reading The Bluest Eye, or parts of it, for Banned Book Club. Have you read any of Toni Morrison's books? Renting blacks cast furtive glances at these owned yards and porches and made firmer commitments to buy themselves some nice little old place. In the meantime, they saved and scratched and piled away what they could in the rented hovels, looking forward to the day of property. So it also is talking about this concept of looking at people as having or not having, that it then is viewed as a personal reflection on people rather than circumstance of, how she mentioned before, caste and class, that people then come to view it as a personal failing or personal success, that it's attributed to who they are and what they're doing in their lives for actually having these things rather than these systems that are inherently inequitable. Charlie Breedlove then, Charlie was the dad of, or is the dad of Piccola, so the person that they're saying that he was a dog, that he turned his whole family outdoors. Then, Charlie Breedlove then, a renting black having put his family outdoors, had catapulted himself beyond the reaches of human consideration. He had joined the animals. Yeah, and then saying how, like, that's how they were able to understand that he was, like, the worst of the worst. Demonizing him, but also understanding that, like, he was renting. So, like, as people are experiencing these intersections of marginalization, that even though he is a man in patriarchy, that he is experiencing racism and class, being in capitalism where he is renting, and that when people are being abused by these larger systems, they are more likely to perpetuate abuse, but in other ways. Where often this book, like the whole theme of it is how people internalize these systems of abuse and then view it as a reflection of their worth rather than a reflection of how deeply oppressive society is as a whole. Not yet, but this is on the reading list from when you started it. Ooh, it's so good. I mean, it's some heavy subject matter, but it is really so profound. Then it's talking about Piccola. She came with nothing, no little paper bag with the other dress or a nightgown or 2 pair of whitish cotton bloomers. She just appeared with a white woman and sat down. Meaning like, the government probably separated the family and that this white woman was working for the government and was like, okay, she's going to stay with you. And they're like, okay, interesting. I need to get to the list. It just keeps outpacing me. That's fine. I mean, it's life, you know? It's hard to find time to do anything for like recreation or pleasure while we're living in capitalism, but also just as an adult and having other things. And especially with like you being in uni as well, like it's hard to find time, let alone like the mental energy to want to read for pleasure. I just keep adding to it. I know. The reading list just keeps growing and growing. I'm with you. What was I going to say here? I think I had something in my notes. Yes. So, like, there are these structures, like, immediately from the beginning of the book, we understand how there are these different layers to marginalization. I thought I wrote something more profound than that, but I did not. Oh, it also is saying that Charlie, so Piccola's dad, was in jail. So him experiencing, like, if he's in jail then, like, it's up for question if he had been in jail before, but people often who are incarcerated, like, it's very likely they've been incarcerated in the past, like, when he's an adult. Here we go. We had fun in those few days Piccola was with us. Frida and I stopped fighting each other and concentrated on our guest, trying hard to keep her from feeling outdoors. When we discovered that she clearly did not want to dominate us, we liked her. We laughed when I clowned for her and smiled and accepted gracefully the food gifts my sister gave her. So, immediately talking about how, like, they are little girls and they understand this concept of domination, of they like people who actually are treating them like people and not like just these objects to be dominated. There is this part in one of the essays by Audre Lorde that I wanted to read that is just excellent. That reminds me of that. Because Toni Morrison was just like so incredibly well read, and like you can tell there's a lot of stuff that she draws on from Audre Lorde's writing, as well as just like many other people's writing. But she has an essay called Sadomasochism, Not About Condemnation. So this is kind of this essay some people view as more controversial because it's essentially a critique of sadomasochism. Audre Lorde identified as a Black lesbian warrior poet, which is super fierce. But also how she was talking about how like sadomasochism, like how that's, and like BDSM in general, it tends to be like a little more common in a lot of queer spaces. But she's talking about it specifically within lesbian circles and relationships where what she is saying is that there is no way to escape this world that is just built off of domination, and that if we actually want to create a world that is truly equitable, we're viewing people as equal, that we actually have a concept of not having these kinds of power imbalances at odds all the time. thinking of doing some other qualifications since I only have qualifications in art. I mean, that's where I was at. I'm like, I'm going to be studying English and then also music. Classical singing. And I'm like, okay. I mean, at least I'm using it here, kind of, hopefully. Notice your top. Thank you. Yes, so this is a dress. It's not officially a sari, but especially with it being Eid, like having like in a holiday in Islam where there's just like rampant Islamophobia in India, want to give some representation there. But also like in talking about the bluest eye and like internalizing these structures of like understanding some of my own deconstruction of like race and identity and ethnicity, of growing up in a very colonized manner, of how like Toni Morrison is able to just like grasp these concepts so well and explain them in a way that's so profound that I was like, I'm gonna wear this. Okay, I'll get to that in a little bit, but gonna run a sociology A level at the very least. That's cool. I think Toni Morrison also studied sociology, like literature and sociology. So yeah, it lends itself very well to the arts and for doing things outside of the arts, which is always helpful for employment purposes. The whole look is cool. Thank you. Okay. So going back to Audre Lorde talking about sadomasochism, the interviewer says, "How do you see the phenomenon of sadomasochism in the lesbian community?" Audre: "Sadomasochism in the lesbian feminist community cannot be seen as separate from the larger economic and social issues surrounding our communities. It is reflective of a whole social and economic trend of this country. Sadly, sadomasochism feels comfortable to some people in this period of development. What is the nature of this allure? Why an emphasis on sadomasochism in the straight media? Sadomasochism is congruent with other developments going on in this country that have to do with dominance and submission, with disparate power, politically, culturally, and economically. The attention that Semois, a San Francisco-based lesbian S&M organization, is getting is probably out of proportion to the representation of sadomasochism in the lesbian community, because there also is this larger eroticism and imposed fetishizing that happens with lesbian relationships, women loving women relationships because of patriarchy and for sexual exploitation, like in porn and everything else. When in actuality, there have been studies done that cis het women, they are actually like compared to cis het men, are more turned on by witnessing like men loving men relationships and like sexual encounters. So like if that like any sort of like erotic media, that they are more aroused by that than cis het men seeing women engaging in that same kind of behavior, which just goes to show like that we're in patriarchy, where it's like, oh, that's like a huge category in porn with like lesbian relationships, but it's never like centering like a female gaze. It's always a male gaze, Gaze. And this also explains like why there are some people that are like so obsessed with heated rivalry. And like I was trying to tell this to people, like explaining its success, that I'm like, yeah, like the queers are loving this, but you are deeply underestimating the amount of straight women that are watching this and are being turned on, and that they are viewing this as like a safe space because it is not inherently like exploiting women, and that there isn't like this feeling of like of feeling threatened. Like, for example, like I went to a queer bar over the weekend just to like show some solidarity. There is a group of workers there that are unionizing, and management was giving them shit. So some people were showing up to show solidarity there, but like for some reason, like there were tons of straight men there. And I could tell that because like the vibe was different. I'd only been to that bar one time before. But like immediately I felt like more threatened physically. Where like this isn't to say like that's not always the case like in straight bars, but like immediately feeling like I had to be like more careful with like my drink, or like who was even coming up to talk to me, and like if they were even being like reading like physical signals of like personal space and stuff. That there are a lot of like straight, like just cishet men in general that like don't pick up on those signals because they don't necessarily have to or haven't been forced to. And then when they feel rejected in some way, then they don't react in a pleasant manner. So, I don't necessarily agree with Audre Lorde with the fact of like, I think sadomasochism is harmful as a whole, but I do because I think it can be like a really freeing and like really empowering exercise in having your consent be taken into consideration, in understanding what you like, what you don't like, and understanding like what that looks like in a very mature way with someone who is respecting your consent and you're respecting theirs. But also, like, I think it's important to note that like we only live in this world where there are these power imbalances, and that unless we can imagine a world without having these power imbalances, that it can often cheapen sometimes this type of power exchange, where it limits the profundity of some of these power exchange situations, where it's like, oh, well, this is what we're in, so we're going to give ourselves the illusion of consent, and that's going to keep us from engaging or doing something potentially about these larger forms of disempowerment. But yeah, I just wanted to bring up that aspect of dominance, that like, especially for these young Black girls in the book, they are very aware of these power structures and hierarchies that are imposed by society, that when they are confronted with people that actually are paying attention to them in a way that isn't dominating, that they are like, oh, okay, we can actually have this. Interesting. Maybe a politics A-level, but the curriculum looks rough. Oh. Yeah, you'll have to let me know what you decide. Like, just straight Western exceptionalism from what I've seen from skimming the summary. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Western exceptionalism of, like, specifically these, like, white supremacist beauty standards, but how they are upheld with all of these larger systems that like can't be extricated, like Audre Lorde was saying, and how like Toni Morrison is conveying, like from class, caste, race, gender, sexuality, all of it is contributing. The hockey. That's so cute. Yes, heated rivalry. I did enjoy that show. I thought it was hot. So there you go. In this next section, so they're talking about graham crackers and then immediately talking about Shirley Temple and how Frida brought her 4 graham crackers on a saucer and some milk in a blue and white Shirley Temple cup. And there's this Shirley Temple song where she's in, what is it called? This movie she was in. I have this pulled up. Curly Top. which I was actually called curly top growing up by some people. And I could be jealous of Shirley Temple that she had like curls that seemed to be like a little bit easier to tame, because I grew up feeling like my hair was a burden, because like having people in my immediate family or just like area not know what to do with it, like cutting my hair, even people did not know what to do with my hair, and feeling like self-conscious of it. Like I would always wear like a headband like this, and like my hair would be just like poofy and frizzy because it would be like brushed while it was dry, which is horrible. So there was a lot of learning there, but like also functioning within this like white supremacist world, and like feeling like if you want to have any sort of dignity, like you have to have people who are even willing to understand you to begin with, to like help you learn about it a lot of the time. Just so asinine for anyone or any group of people to tell others how they should live, dress, act. Exactly. Where it's like how I was mentioning earlier in like my rant of like people try to act like cops all the time, of like, oh, you weren't like, your anger at this system isn't appropriate. That's like, okay, you have a lot of privilege in this system. You are allowed to be angry in your way. Why aren't you allowing people to be angry in the ways that like are extremely valid? So this is a little scene from Curly Top where she sings that song. This is an orphanage as well, and of course it's like an all-white girl orphanage.
Animal crackers in my soup, monkeys and rabbits loop the loop. Gosh, oh gee, but I have fun swallowing animals one by one. In every bowl of soup I see lions and tigers watching me. I make 'em jump right through a hoop, those animal crackers in my soup. When I get hold of the big bad wolf, I just push him under the ground. Then I bite him in a million bits, and I gobble him right down. When they're inside me where it's dark, I walk around like Noah's Ark. I stuff my tummy like a goop with animal crackers in my soup. And
I would sing that a lot growing up. So it's so interesting, like reading this book and being like, whoa, I can relate to some of these things. And that's not even with dealing with as much colorism and racializing as what Black women experience and Black girls grow up with in your socialization. Especially like wanting to have blonde hair and understanding that like when there is abuse in families as well, and like living, like being in a multiracial family, that it's like this is not always distributed equally, and that often like with these internalized structures of oppression, that like people who have proximity to these like white beauty standards can be treated better. Or like the phenomenon of growing up, and like I had curly hair growing up, of course, like I have like ringlets and stuff, but I noticed very significantly a shift in people's treatment of me, where like I already like felt self-conscious of my hair in a lot of ways because I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't really have people around me that knew how to do it. And then going through puberty with my hair becoming much tighter in a curl texture, not being received as like pleasantly by society, that it was viewed in a more racialized construct, and that there was like a lot of resentment growing like from the people around me and being like, I don't know how to do your hair and stuff, like even more so than in the past. And then how that was internalized for me to be like, oh, I don't have control over this, like many people don't, with appearances and how society is receiving them. So instead of it being like, oh, this is a reflection on society and how it is inherently inequitable, it feels like it is a personal failing because you actually have more, that feels like you have more control over the situation than actually understanding that, like, oh, it's this like huge sprawling system that's contributing to things. And it's incredibly hard to change, as we're talking about organizing and how we actually accomplish that. Okay, I want to read this excerpt really quick. Frida and she, meaning Pecola, had a loving conversation about how cute Shirley Temple was, meaning like Q.oot, which I love because that's like such a small detail, but also emphasizing like how they're saying it, like cute. I couldn't join them in their adoration because I hated Shirley. And I can relate to this of like admiring her, but also like being resentful of like, you have these like golden curls that like seem like everyone seems to love, while at the same time like Shirley Temple was dealing with a lot of abuse in the industry and like sexual abuse by living in this exploitative industry and patriarchal society, where it's like, even when you have this proximity to these white beauty standards, it doesn't mean that you are exempt from abuse, but it doesn't mean that this abuse is distributed as evenly or to the degree that it is to other people. Not because she was cute, but because she danced with Bojangles, who was my friend, my uncle, my daddy, and who ought to have been soft-shoeing it and chuckling with me. Instead, he was enjoying, sharing, giving a lovely dance thing with one of those little white girls whose socks never slid down under their heels. So I said, I like Jane Withers. So just being like, why is he dancing with her? Like, and this is Bojangles, that was his nickname, but Bill Robinson, he was a tapper, he was an incredible dancer. And of course, like the art form of tap came from primarily people who were enslaved, Black people, where there was this way to create rhythm with your feet and to have that be the basis for other people dancing. But then that became an art form in and of itself that was co-opted by white people. And the example of Shirley Temple is like very, very on the nose with that. So I want to show this. This is Bill Robinson. And he did dance with Shirley Temple a lot.
Whenever you talk about tap dancing, you said, who's the world's greatest dancer? We always say, Bill Robinson was the world's greatest tap dancer.
Boy, you got educated.
Which a lot of people, especially in like white, like Western society, like the mythos and the legends that are created in Hollywood, when people think of tapping, they think of Gene Kelly. But it's like, how about we think of Bill Robinson, who like helped pioneer the art form and popularize it and was incredible at it.
Here's one I sat up all night trying to do.
Well, Bill Robinson, he really had the tap thing going and he had the joy thing going. And so it was very pleasurable to watch him dance because he appeared to be having such a great time.
He's also another great tap dancer.
Honest to God, he was something else. He was the greatest, and doors have opened for us.
Come here.
That would never have opened had he not been there.
So there he is with Shirley Temple, where she's able to benefit from this art form and from having proximity to whiteness. You can understand why Claudia, this young Black girl in the Bluest eye, is like, why are you dancing with her? Like, I can probably dance better than her. Or like, he's like, I know him. Like, he looks like my uncle. He's my friend. Like, why are you dancing with him?
Bill Bojangles Robinson was a legend among dancers and a hero to his public. With his ever-present smile and endless energy, he charmed his way into the hearts of millions. But few knew of the obstacles he had to overcome to get to the top, or the lives he touched along the way.
Okay, I want to finish this for Culture Corner, so we'll get to that, but I wanted to show a little bit of his incredible dancing, some of that background. Oh, and I did also have Jane Withers. So Jane Withers was also this young girl who was famous around the same time that Shirley Temple was, but she had brown eyes, brown hair that was curly. But again, they didn't have someone like this character, Claudia, Frida, Piccola. These young black girls didn't have someone that looked like them that they could be like, I like her. Like, she's my favorite. It's like there was this small selection of people that they could be choosing from because of limited representation. See, look here. This is older Shirley Temple and Jane Withers. Okay. And then here's this last part that I want to talk about with dolls, and then we can finish with the reading. But with reading The Scarlet Pimpernel, so we can get that out of the way. This idea of patriarchy and being objectified, like quite literally, of being an object to people, that young girls and this idea of having very strict gender roles in receiving dolls, like that happens before you even have the ability to form words. That, like, Toni Morrison talks about this concept of having language, the acquisition of language with these like Dick and Jane Reader books, that they were extremely racialized, that when people, like this very Lacanian interpretation of like how people start to, like, with the acquisition and learning of language, that they then start to develop a sense of self. Okay. Younger than both Frida and Piccola, I had not yet arrived at the turning point in the development of my psyche which would allow me to love her, or like the internalization of these beauty standards quite yet, is what she means by that, of Shirley Temple. What I felt at that time was unsullied hatred, but before that I had felt a stranger, more frightening thing than hatred for all the Shirley Temples of the world. It had begun with Christmas and the gift of dolls. The big, the special, the loving gift was always a big, blue-eyed baby doll. Then she goes on and saying, like, the other alternative to these blue-eyed baby dolls were Raggedy Anns. And she's like, I don't want a Raggedy Ann. And then also the fact that, like, one of these dolls, like the few ones that had, like, tighter curls in their hair, they were called Raggedy. Like, they were viewed as, like, being lower class, as being less than like, these pristine China dolls, and, like, these blue-eyed baby dolls. But she says here, I destroyed white baby dolls, but the dismembering of dolls was not the true horror. The truly horrifying thing was the transference of the same impulses to little white girls. The indifference with which I could have axed them was shaken only by my desire to do so. To discover what eluded me, the secret of the magic they weaved on others. What made people look at them and say, "Aww," but not for me? The eye slide of black women as they approached them on the street, and the possessive gentleness of their touch as they handled them. If I pinched them, their eyes, unlike the crazed glint of the baby doll's eyes, would fold in pain. And their cry would not be the sound of an icebox door, but a fascinating cry of pain. So actually, like, feeling like you have a result come from it, and that, like, someone is suffering in a way that, like, you feel internally. When I learned how repulsive this disinterested violence was, that it was repulsive because it was disinterested, my shame floundered about for refuge. The best hiding place was love. Thus, the conversion from pristine sadism to fabricated hatred to fraudulent love. It was a small step to Shirley Temple. I learned much later to worship her, just as I learned to delight in cleanliness, knowing, even as I learned, that the change was adjustment without improvement. Like, are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me with this language of like, I have like the goosebumps and like talking about such like important, profound, complex topics that like you don't even realize that you are internalizing and experiencing as a child, but especially with these intersections of marginalization, that like the bluest eye, the idea of it is born out of this concept of Toni Morrison saying that she grew up wanting to read a story like this, where there's representation of her as a young Black girl that was telling her that she was beautiful, that she was telling her that like you are justified in feeling angry, that there are all of these systems that are telling you that you are less than, when that just is not the truth. That like what you feel when you're young of like, this is unjust, like this is not right, that like in order to survive this horrible, oppressive world we live in, we end up having to internalize these things as a way of survival, not as a way of just saying like, oh, I don't like myself because it's fun, but because like this is how we've learned to survive. So, I did want to show this. So, with my own like, I recognize like this is talking specifically about colorism and the experience that Black women and girls have in particularly American society, and these what it means to be growing up with all of these white supremacist beauty standards, and like not to be like making it about me. But like as someone who even has like proximity to whiteness, with having light skin, with having like lighter eyes, like I have hazel eyes, I don't have blue eyes, but I was always resentful of people who had blue eyes, and I wasn't even sure why. And I think part of that was like seeing some of the treatment that was different with some of my siblings, like people who looked more Eurocentric, got treated better. So like go figure. Like how that's internalized, but also how, like even with having this proximity to whiteness, like understanding some racialization, like as I got older and like I got a longer nose, that is typically more associated with being Southeast Asian, with hair texture that is not associated with being Caucasian or being Eurocentric, having more like almond shaped eyes, that like I always tried to like cosplay essentially as like a Victorian ghost. Like I would try to make myself look like as white as possible, like in hindsight, because there was all of this like internalization of that. But also when it comes to gender and gender expression, and feeling this resentment of not feeling like I could choose a certain kind of presentation. And so my illusion of choice was to like double down on femininity and being very femme presenting. And so like doing a lot of decolonizing my mind and understanding that like being Hydra, like the gender identity that I identify with, is viewed as sacred in many Daisy cultures, of having proximity to understanding nuance and gender fluidity, and especially with like learning what all of the symbolism is with, you know, traditional dress, and in Hinduism, like not Hindutva, which is Hindu nationalism used to impose oppression for these very nefarious caste structures that are violent and creating a hierarchy of human dignity. But like making that distinction, that like having a bindi, that this is representative of the god Ardhanashrawar, and how that is representative of duality, of femininity and masculinity, and feeling like I never fell very neatly into either of those categories. And then realizing that it's like, oh, that's actually like part of my identity. That's actually part of like this ethnicity that I come from, that like feels very true to me, that it's like you have to rediscover as time goes on when you're deconstructing these systems. So, like, there is this video that I wanted to show that explains some of this.
The Nareshwar Roop of Shiv. Why should God be only a male or a female? God is not gender biased. The Rishis have given us Ardha means half, Nari means Shakti, and Ishwar means a form of Shiv. And Ardha Nareshwar is a union of both. From a tantric point of view, when the Ida Pingla meets at the Shushumna, that is the third eye chakra, that is where the Ardha Nareshwar deity is sitting. The creator and the
Yes. So like this symbol of like what I came to understand of like bindis are not just worn in like Hindu societies and religions, but also that it extends to many other Southeast Asian and Asian cultures as well, but that it is a representation of this duality. But because of colonization and these strict views on gender that essentially like eliminate this idea that like gender fluidity and expansiveness is a good thing through colonization, that like it's only associated or mostly associated with femme people and with women, and that it is used as a way to signal for people to impose patriarchy and misogyny rather than being a symbol of expansiveness. And so this represents a third eye, or that chakra, and like having an open mind. And so when you hear people like are meditating, like when you say like Om, that is a syllable that is associated with meditation because it's opening your third eye. So like this is also a way to kind of decolonize how white people have co-opted these spaces, like yoga and meditation, that there are like these things that have been around for a very long time, that they somehow are only viewed as valid and not heathen or like evil or weird or eccentric when like white people have co-opted them and are actively making money from them.
creation both are one. The Mahamaya and the consciousness behind the Mahamaya both are one. It is to make you realize that every step you take, Shiv and Shakti work together, and if you are doing sadhana of Shiv, Shakti will come to you, and if you are Shakti sadhak, Shiv will come to you. Please understand and be very aware there is no duality, because everything is coming from the same source, and that is Sat Chit Anand. Hari Om Tat Sat. The Ardhanareshwar Roop of Shiv. Why should God be only a male or a female?
So this is me. This is how I feel. And like as we're talking about the bluest eye and like deconstructing these like concepts not only of beauty standards but gender and patriarchy and class, caste specifically, that is said in this reading. I was so stoked to read that. That it all has to do with like the interconnectedness of these oppressive systems. They tie back to colonization and colorism, which is this form of non-consensual domination to create these hierarchies of human dignity that just are a delusion. They're an illusion and they're delusional. That like when you grow up feeling like you have more of an innate sense of who you are, but then it actively gets like beaten out of you, sometimes literally, but like by society, that there's this indoctrination that happens, that you have to internalize these things in order to survive, but that they aren't truths. That like the truth that was there originally is like much more profound than like anything that like people are telling you that you are or who you are, most especially. As I joined social media most recently, and this like happened like the day I think we started the reading for the Bluest Eye, or like shortly after, that I was like, oh my God, this is exactly like what Toni Morrison is talking about, but like in my own little multiracial, having proximity to whiteness experience. When I first got on Instagram to create an account for streaming, I was recommended an account of someone that, like, Turd Bob, you know who this is, but like someone we went to high school with, who is blonde, blue-eyed, straight, cis, very skinny, and like actively pursuing a career like in entertainment and like the arts and fashion and stuff. And it like it immediately like started making me like spin out. And I'm like, normally I feel like I'm pretty like confident and like self-assured in many ways. Like that's been like hard fought and won. But it was like this confrontation of like, oh, this is why I don't like social media, of like constantly comparing to other people and like having to confront like very directly like someone who seemed to like symbolize all of these things that I wasn't and I would never be. And that like if I was more like this person, that maybe I would have like more acceptance with my family or in like society at large, or be able to have more like autonomy with like a career and stuff, be noticed for more things that I felt like I had to like work extra hard for, or like being resentful of like, because you look a certain way or you're falling into people's expectations in that way, like you didn't have to go to the hard work of like being a nerdy theater kid if you want to be an actor or like trying to put in all this time to like learn singing and like practicing, rather than being like, oh, I'm going to like fly to this big city and do a master class, and I'm going to be in this music video, and then I'm going to do this. And then like that really forced me to like have to check a lot of things, like these things that I thought I had deconstructed over time, and realize that it's like that still exists. And it's like a constant process of self-acceptance and decolonizing. That's not just like a one and done thing. And that like these things are representative of aligning with a society that like wants you to be a particular way. And that's like how I talk about like not wanting to conform. Like that annoys me, people who are wanting to conform, and part of that has to do with like that larger experience. But yeah, where was I going with that? Anyway, it just like forced me to confront some things that like were very timely as we were starting to read this, that I was like, oh, we still are dealing with so much of this stuff. And like I'm someone that is not dealing with as many like racialized structures and treatment that other people are, particularly Black women, and especially like trans Black women, transgender expansive Black people, and even with like Southeast Asian people, of like this colorism of like benefiting from these racial structures when you have proximity to whiteness, but still feeling like you are not fitting this ideal, because that's something that can be bought. That's something that is a constantly moving goalpost, rather than like honoring people's individuality and diversity of thought and diversity of existence, where it's like going back to that idea of like people are just like constantly trying to be cops, like policing each other's like thoughts and type of resistance, rather than, and like trying to impose ideas rather than actually like getting things from a democratic way that actually value diversity, because that's what we've learned from all of these structures that we're living in. And like how really tragic that is, like how sad it is when like we often are perpetuating these systems that also hurt us. And like that's what oppression is. But as Bell Hooks says, you know, oppression is the absence of choices. And so especially when you are perceived in all of these ways that you can't control, how you are very limited in what you do have control over. And a lot of that has to do with how you view yourself, and how we have to deconstruct all of these things like on a regular basis, because if not, it just creeps in. And there's so much propaganda and advertising and messaging that says like we shouldn't be who we are, and celebrate that and have pride in who we are, rather than conforming, because conforming, sameness, that's fascism. And not only is fascism just like morally deplorable, but it also is fucking boring, where like no one wants, we shouldn't want to all be the same, because that makes us easier to be controlled. And that's part of resisting, is just having joy in who we are. Anyway, that was a lot. But I guess, you know, that's kind of what we do here, or I do here. I don't know. There you go. That's what we're doing for today. Honestly, I don't have time to finish the reading of the Scarlet Pimpernel, but I also don't care. We can finish that later. And then we'll finish the second part of chapter 30 tomorrow, finish 31 on Friday, and the next week we'll start on the Communist Manifesto as a palate cleanser for all of that aristocratic propaganda. But anyway, I probably went on too many tangents. Whatever. Oh, I feel very strongly about these things. That was not apparent earlier. It's just like, why can't we just like respect each other's differences and not try to control people? Stop acting like cops all the time. Because it like hurts everyone, including people who are engaging in that behavior. So, anyway, that'll be it for me today. But thank you for being here, for listening to these rants. Hopefully some of it made sense. Maybe some of it resonated. Tangent till your heart is content. Oh, that might take a while. But anyway, I do appreciate this space, being able to talk about things where, like, in a world where, like, so many of us, like most of us, I think, feel very unheard in many aspects of being like, hey, it's okay to be you. It's okay to embrace your heritage and culture and expansiveness, to have half facial hair on your face and not. Yep. That's it. Tomorrow, I do want to get into, before we finish chapter 30 of the Scarlet Pimpernel, get into more of local news, how that relates to a lot of local organizing that is happening, especially with unions and labor, because there are a lot of really great things that people are doing, but of course we're seeing how there is this retaliation that is happening in full force. So I think it's important to highlight this stuff. We don't really have much coverage on it, especially when it comes to Utah. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the situation with these data centers that are being built, and we'll go over some labor history. There was a video that we started watching a little bit ago that we didn't finish, that I'm like, let's just watch it all from the beginning, because it's been a while. So, anyway, yeah. That'll be it for me. But thank you all for being here. It was lovely chatting with you. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Okay, bye.